My whole world didn't just collapse. It was vaporized in an instant. One moment, I was a mother about to surprise her son. The next, I was a ghost in my own life, listening to my own eulogy being planned by the very person I'd given that life to. My name is Eleanor, I'm 63 years old, and this is the story of how my greatest love became my greatest threat. It all started on a crisp autumn afternoon. The kind where the air smells like cinnamon and fallen leaves. For over 30 years, I've owned a small artisanal bakery called The Rolling Pin. It's not just a business. It's the four walls that hold every sacrifice I've ever made. I woke up at 4 a.m. every single day, my hands permanently dusted with flour, my back aching from leaning over the kneading table. But every bit of it was for him. My son, Leo. Leo was my sun, my moon, my entire universe. His father, Michael, passed away from a sudden heart attack when Leo was only 10, leaving us with not much more than a mountain of love and a half-paid mortgage. Overnight, I went from being a wife and mother to a warrior. The bakery became my battlefield, and I fought every day to make sure Leo never felt the sting of our loss. Especially not financially. He was a brilliant kid, with a talent for design and a dream of becoming an architect. His high school teachers would pull me aside, their eyes wide with sincerity, telling me, "Eleanor, that boy has a gift. You have to get him into a top university." And so, their words became my gospel. Every dollar that wasn't for rent or food went into a fund labeled Leo's Future. When he got accepted into a prestigious architecture program, the tuition was a figure so high it felt like a cruel joke. It was more than the bakery made in a year. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the acceptance letter in one hand and a stack of unpaid bills in the other, feeling the walls close in. That night, I opened the old wooden box where I kept Michael's things. I took out his vintage watch, the one he wore on our wedding day. It was my most treasured possession, the last piece of him I had left. The next day, I sold it. I told Leo a distant relative had left me a small inheritance. He never questioned it. I never wanted him to feel the weight of that sacrifice. I only wanted him to fly, and he did. He graduated with honors and landed a job at a high-end firm in the city. A few years later, he met Chloe. She was polished. She came from old money, the kind of family that had summer homes and sailed on weekends. She was always perfectly polite to me, but there was a certain sterile distance in her eyes when she looked around my small, cozy apartment above the bakery. She'd compliment my pastries with a tight smile. But I could feel her silently judging the worn floorboards and the mismatched furniture I'd collected over the years. After they got married, Leo started to change. His visits to the bakery grew less frequent. The excuses were always plausible: a work deadline, a charity gala with Chloe's parents, a weekend trip. When they did visit, the conversation felt strained. It was all about their new life, the exclusive restaurants they were trying, the plans for a multi-million-dollar condo they had their eyes on, the art they were collecting. My world of flour and yeast felt a million miles away from theirs. It was as if my son was slowly being replaced by a stranger who wore his face, a man who was becoming ashamed of the very world I had built to create him. Still, a mother's hope is a stubborn thing. I noticed they'd been distant lately, and I wanted to bridge the gap. For their recent housewarming, I'd bought them one of those fancy smart home hubs, thinking it was something modern they'd both like. Leo had mentioned he was struggling to get it set up properly. So, I had an idea. I would go over to their new apartment, get the hub working perfectly as a surprise, and leave them a basket of their favorite pastries from the bakery, the same lemon tarts Leo had loved since he was a boy. I let myself in with the spare key he'd given me. The apartment was silent and immaculate, looking more like a showroom than a home. I found the smart hub on the kitchen counter, still in its box. I'm not a tech genius, but I can follow instructions. To test the microphone and speaker, the manual said to link it temporarily to my own phone's app. So I did. I got it all connected, and the sound was crystal clear. Just as I was arranging the pastries on a platter, I heard the key in the front door. My first instinct was to hide in the pantry and jump out to surprise them. It was a silly, childish idea, but I craved seeing that genuine, happy smile on my son's face, the one I hadn't seen in so long. I slipped into the pantry, leaving the door cracked just enough to see Leo and Chloe walked in, but they weren't alone. Their friend Marcus was with them. Marcus was a financial advisor, a slick guy who always seemed to be whispering in Leo's ear. I stayed quiet, my heart thumping with playful anticipation. "Are you sure we're alone?" Chloe asked, her voice sharp and low. "Yeah, of course," Leo said. "Mom thinks we're at your parents' brunch this afternoon. She won't be stopping by." My smile froze. I watched them through the crack as they settled on their stark white sofa. I figured I'd just wait for Marcus to leave. But then the conversation started, and the playful thumping in my chest turned into a cold, heavy dread. My phone was still in my hand, the smart hub app still open. Unthinking, I tapped the live listen feature, just to hear them more clearly. The audio came through my phone's earpiece with perfect clarity. Okay, let's go over it one more time, Marcus said, his voice all business. The plan has to be flawless. It is, Chloe said coolly. The bakery's main gas oven is ancient. It's been having ignition problems for years. A small, untraceable malfunction. A delayed ignition causing a gas buildup. It happens. My breath caught in my throat. They were talking about my bakery. My oven. And your mom is always there late on Thursdays, right? Cashing out, prepping for Friday morning? Marcus continued. Leo's voice was shaky when he spoke. Always. She locks up around 10 p.m. Chloe sighed, a sound of pure impatience. Leo, don't get all wobbly now. We've been over this. It's a tragic accident. A beloved local baker, a faulty piece of old equipment. No one will question it. It's a sad story, but these things happen. My blood turned to ice. It couldn't be. I was mishearing. This was some kind of horrible, twisted joke. The numbers work, Marcus said, tapping on a tablet. Her life insurance policy is $500,000. The bakery property, once you sell it to that developer, is worth at least another $700,000. And I've confirmed her personal savings are just over $80,000. All told, you're looking at about $1.3 million. Enough for the down payment on the penthouse at the Grand, with plenty left over, Chloe finished, a note of triumph in her voice. We can finally get out of this place and live the life we're supposed to live. Your mother had a good run, Leo. Now it's our turn. I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a scream. I was crouched in the dark pantry, surrounded by the smell of cleaning supplies, listening to my son, my friend, and my daughter-in-law calmly planning my murder as if they were discussing a stock portfolio. The basket of lemon tarts I had so lovingly prepared sat on the counter outside, a monument to my own stupidity. The woman who had walked into this apartment an hour ago, full of love and hope, was gone. She died right there, in that cold, dark pantry. And in her place, something else was born. Something cold, something broken, and something that knew, with chilling certainty, that this was no longer a family matter. This was war. I don't know how long I stayed crouched in that pantry. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Time had ceased to have any meaning. My joints screamed in protest, but I was paralyzed by a fear so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. The cheerful voices of my son and his wife drifted from the living room, laced with the poison of their intentions. They were laughing now, discussing which bottle of wine to open to celebrate their new venture. My murder was a venture. A business deal. The final transaction in the life I had given him. My mind was a hurricane of fragmented thoughts. Leo as a little boy, his face covered in chocolate from a stolen cupcake. Leo at his high school graduation, his eyes shining with pride as he held his diploma. Leo on his wedding day, whispering, "Thanks, Mom, for everything," as I adjusted his tie. Were all those moments a lie? Had this cold, calculating monster been lurking beneath the surface all along? Or had I, in my blind love, created a man so accustomed to my sacrifices that he saw my very life as just one more thing he was entitled to? Finally, I heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and the clinking of glasses. Marcus was leaving. "I'll email you the finalized breakdown tomorrow," he said. "We're on track. Just stick to the plan." "Don't worry," Chloe's voice was like polished steel. "We will." After the door clicked shut, I waited, my breath held tight in my chest. I counted to 500, my body trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't risk them still being there. Pushing the pantry door open with a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I peered out. The apartment was empty. The basket of lemon tarts sat on the counter, a golden, mocking testament to the mother I used to be. I couldn't bear to look at them. Leaving the pastries behind, I slipped out of the apartment, pulling the door silently closed behind me. The walk to my car was a blur. Every smiling stranger felt like a threat. Every passing car seemed to be watching me. The world, which had been so familiar and safe just hours ago, was now a hostile landscape painted in shades of betrayal. I drove home on pure instinct, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. When I got back to my little apartment above the bakery, I locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and leaned against it, finally letting out the silent scream that had been clawing its way up my throat. My home, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every photograph on the wall was an accusation. There was Leo, age 7, missing his 2 front teeth. There we were on a cheap beach vacation, the only one I could ever afford. I saw the love, the joy, the history. And all he saw was an asset to be liquidated. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my worn armchair, the one Michael and I bought at a flea market, and I let the grief wash over me. It was a physical, gut-wrenching pain, a mourning for a son who was still alive but was, to me, completely and utterly gone. The boy I raised had been murdered by the man he had become, but as the first gray light of dawn filtered through my window, something shifted. The waves of grief began to recede, and in their place, a cold, hard shoreline of anger began to form. They thought I was a fragile old woman. A sweet, naive baker who could be easily discarded. They had underestimated me my entire life. They saw my sacrifices as weakness, not strength. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My first thought was the police. But it vanished as quickly as it came. What could I tell them? That I overheard a conversation on a smart hub I was setting up? My son, the handsome, successful architect, and his wealthy, well-connected wife would deny everything. They would paint me as a lonely, confused old woman, maybe slipping into dementia. They had a witness, Marcus, who would back their story. It would be my word against theirs, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, who they would believe. There would be no justice for me there. Only humiliation. No. If I was going to survive this, I had to do it myself. I had to beat them at their own game. They wanted to write a story about a tragic accident. Fine. But I would be the author of this story. I would control the narrative, the characters, and the ending. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. Not just a friend to cry with, but someone with a particular set of skills. My mind immediately went to one person. Arthur Kowalski. Arthur was a retired police detective who had been a regular at the Rolling Pin for the last 5 years. He was a widower, a man in his late 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a gruff exterior that I suspected had a deep sense of integrity. He came in every morning at 6:30 a.m. sharp for a black coffee and an almond croissant. We had a comfortable routine, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or the local news. He knew my son, had seen him grow up from a distance during his infrequent visits. He was the only person I could think of who wouldn't immediately dismiss me as crazy. That morning, he came in like clockwork. I tried to act normal, my hands shaking slightly as I poured his coffee. "Arthur," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Could you spare a few minutes after I close up tonight? There's something I need to talk to you about. It's important." He looked at me, his gaze sharp and analytical. He must have seen the terror in my eyes, the exhaustion etched onto my face. He simply nodded. "I'll be here at 7. The day was the longest of my life. I went through the motions, kneading dough, frosting cakes, serving customers, all while the horrifying conversation played on a loop in my head. Every time the bell on the door jingled, I flinched, expecting to see Leo and Chloe walk in, their faces smiling, their hearts full of murder. At 7 o'clock. I flipped the sign on the door to "closed" and drew the blinds. The bakery was quiet, filled with the comforting smell of sugar and bread. It felt like a bizarre stage for the story I was about to tell. Arthur knocked, and I let him in, leading him to one of the small tables. "This is on the house," I said, placing a coffee and a slice of apple pie in front of him. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and the words tumbled out. I told him everything. About Michael, about the bakery, about selling the watch, about Leo's transformation. And then I told him about the smart hub, about hiding in the pantry, about the oven, the life insurance, the penthouse. I took out my phone and played the audio file I had managed to save from the app's temporary cache before it was deleted. He listened without interrupting, his expression slowly changing from polite concern to stony disbelief, and then to a cold, hard rage that seemed to radiate from him. He didn't look at me. He stared at the wall behind me, his jaw clenched. When the recording finished, the silence in the bakery was deafening. He finally met my eyes. "The sick bastards," he growled, the words low and full of venom. He pushed the untouched pie away. "I've seen a lot of things in my 30 years on the force. I've seen greed turn decent people into monsters. But this, a son? Your own son?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "The police won't believe me, Arthur," I whispered, tears finally threatening to fall. "It's my word against theirs." "You're right," he said, his voice flat and resolute. "They wouldn't. It's too clean on their end. It would get buried in paperwork and dismissed. They'd tear you apart on the stand." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time since I'd left that apartment, I felt a tiny flicker of something other than fear. It was hope. "So we don't go to the police," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We let them think their plan is working. We let them walk right into their own trap." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart starting to pound again, but this time with a different kind of energy. "I mean," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "we need to know their timeline. We need to know every move they make. We need to gather our own evidence that's better than a single recording. You said they're planning this for a Thursday. We need to find out which Thursday." He stood up and began to pace the small space between the tables, the old detective in him coming alive. "The first step is surveillance. We need to watch them. Your son, his wife, and this Marcus character. We need to know who they talk to, where they go, what they buy. They'll need to source something to rig that oven, something that won't look out of place. They'll make a mistake. They always do. He stopped and looked at me, his expression deadly serious. "This is going to be dangerous, Eleanor. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked around my bakery. At the photos on the wall, the ovens that had fed my son, the counters that had supported me through my darkest hours. They wanted to turn my life's work into my tomb. "Arthur," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in 24 hours. "They've already taken my son. I'll be damned if I let them take anything else." The back room of the rolling pin, once a simple storeroom for 50-pound bags of flour and sugar, transformed into our clandestine headquarters. Arthur, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent his life navigating the shadows, turned it into a surprisingly effective command center. He brought in a large corkboard, the kind he used to use for mapping out homicide cases, and in the center, he pinned photos of Leo, Chloe, and Marcus that I'd printed from their social media profiles. Seeing their smiling, carefree faces connected by lines of red yarn felt like a desecration of my own memory. "First things first," Arthur said, his voice a low grumble as he set up a pair of burner phones. "No more using our personal devices to talk about this. From now on, this is our only line of communication." He handed one to me. It felt cold and foreign in my hand, a tool for a life I never asked for. "Second, we need eyes and ears." He explained that our single audio recording wasn't enough. We needed a pattern of behavior, a body of evidence so overwhelming that it couldn't be dismissed. He had an old contact who sold him two small, magnetic GPS trackers. The kind you can hide in a wheel well. Our first mission was to plant them, and waiting for the right moment was an exercise in pure terror. Arthur tailed Leo from his office, and I took Chloe, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I followed her luxury SUV from a Pilates class to a high-end department store. In the sprawling, anonymous parking garage, while she was inside trying on clothes she didn't need, I did the unthinkable. I, Eleanor Vance, a 63-year-old baker, scurried like a criminal and attached a tracking device to my own son's car. It felt like a final, irreversible severing of the woman I once was. For the first week, the data that filtered back to us was a portrait of a life I couldn't comprehend. They were a whirlwind of activity, extravagant dinners where the wine cost more than my weekly grocery bill, art gallery openings, weekend trips to wine country. I watched their movements on the map on Arthur's laptop, a sickening mix of anger and sorrow churning in my gut. They were spending my inheritance before I was even dead, toasting to a future built on my ashes. Arthur was patient, methodical. "Don't watch them, Eleanor," he'd advise, seeing the pain on my face. "Watch their patterns. Look for the break. The thing that doesn't fit." The first break came not from Leo or Chloe, but from Marcus. His tracker showed a peculiar pattern. Twice a week, during his lunch hour, he would drive to a seedy, rundown part of town and spend exactly 45 minutes at an unmarked establishment that Arthur, after a bit of digging, identified as an illegal off-track betting parlor. Well, Arthur said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Our slick financial advisor has a gambling problem. A bad one, by the looks of it." It all clicked into place. Marcus wasn't just helping them out of friendship. He was desperate. His involvement wasn't just opportunistic. It was a lifeline. A man with a gambling addiction is a man who makes mistakes. This was our first real piece of leverage, but we still needed more. We needed to be inside their apartment again, to hear the specifics of their plan. The smart hub I had set up was a one-time fluke. They'd be too careful now. "A gift," Arthur announced one morning over coffee. "It has to be another gift. Something they won't suspect." He slid a brochure across the table for a high-end digital photo frame. "It can stream photos from your phone. It's the perfect gift from a loving mother who wants to share memories. It also has a voice-activated feature, which means it has a very high-quality, always-on microphone." My blood ran cold. I had to go back there. I had to face them, smile at them, and act as if my world hadn't been shattered into a million pieces. "I can do it," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I called Leo, my voice trembling just enough to sound like a lonely mother, not a terrified target. I told him I had a little something for them and asked if I could drop it by. After a brief, muffled conversation with Chloe, he agreed. The next day, I stood outside their apartment door, a fresh box of croissants in one hand and the Trojan horse in the other. When Leo opened the door, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his expression. Was it guilt? Or was I just projecting my own desperate hope? "Mom, hi, come on in," he said, stepping aside. Chloe glided in from the kitchen, a vision in beige cashmere. "Eleanor, how lovely to see you. You really shouldn't have." "Oh, it's nothing," I said, my voice an octave too high. I explained the photo frame, telling them I thought it would be a wonderful way for us to feel more connected. I could send them pictures of new cake designs, and they could send me photos from their trips. It was the performance of a lifetime. I was a doting, slightly technologically clumsy mother, fumbling with the settings as I set it up on their mantelpiece. My fingers secretly activating the remote audio access through the burner phone in my pocket. As I was getting ready to leave, Chloe placed a light, cold hand on my arm. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We're so glad you came, but you really should call before you pop over from now on. Leo and I have such hectic schedules, and we'd hate for you to come all this way to an empty apartment. And for safety, For safety." The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat. Our safety from you, not your safety from us. She was telling me not to show up unannounced again. She was controlling the environment. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were getting ready. The photo frame was a goldmine. Tucked away in the bakery's back room, Arthur and I would listen for hours. Most of it was the mundane chatter of a couple's life, which somehow made the sinister snippets even more jarring. We heard them arguing about money. We heard Chloe pressuring Leo about securing the loan for the penthouse, using his mother's inevitable payout as the guarantee. Then, one evening, we got the breakthrough we were waiting for. I spoke to my contact. Leo's voice came through the small speaker, sounding stressed. "He can get the regulator valve. It's a K27 model, the one that was recalled 20 years ago for delayed ignition faults. It's the perfect component. Untraceable to us, but a known fire risk. The fire marshal's report will basically write itself." My hands grew numb. He was using his architectural knowledge, his expertise on building components and safety codes, to design my death. Then Chloe's voice cut in, sharp and clear. When can he get it?" "I'm picking it up next Tuesday," Leo said. "He wants cash. A lot of it." "Fine," Chloe snapped. "Just get it." I spoke with Marcus. "Everything is in place with the insurance paperwork. He said as long as it happens before the end of the month, we're golden." There was a pause. Then Leo spoke the words that stopped my heart. "Don't worry," he said, his voice heavy with a resignation that sounded almost tragic. "It's all set. We're on for the Thursday after next. September 25th. A date. They had a date. In our quiet little headquarters, Arthur and I looked at each other. The hum of the refrigerators suddenly sounded deafening. He reached for a calendar on the wall, one from the flower supplier, and took a red marker from his pocket. He drew a slow, deliberate circle around the number 25.9 days. I had 9 days left until my son was going to try and murder me. The abstract horror had finally coalesced into a single, terrifying point in time. It was no longer a possibility. It was an appointment. Arthur turned to me, his face a grim mask. "Okay, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and steady. "They have their date. Now we have ours." He tapped the red circle. "This is the day they think your life ends. We have 9 days to make sure it's the day their lives, as they know them, are over for good." The red circle on the calendar wasn't just a date. It was a ticking clock, and every second that passed was a deafening beat counting down to my own scheduled execution. The atmosphere in our little back room shifted. The initial shock and strategic planning gave way to a tense, electric urgency. 9 days. It felt like an eternity, and no time at all. Arthur became my shadow, my rock. He knew I was teetering on the edge of a psychological abyss. One moment, I'd be filled with a righteous, cold fury, meticulously taking notes on their every move. The next, a wave of grief would hit me so hard I'd have to sit down, my head in my hands, remembering Leo as a boy who was afraid of the dark, a boy I used to sing to sleep. How could that child have grown into this monster? "Don't let him in your head, Eleanor," Arthur would say, his voice firm but not unkind. "The boy you're remembering is gone. The man who's left is a stranger, and he's a stranger who wants to kill you. That's the only thing you can focus on right now." He was right. I had to compartmentalize my heart, locking away the mother and letting the survivor take control. Our surveillance became relentless. On the Tuesday Leo was scheduled to pick up the regulator valve. Arthur tailed him. He watched from a distance as Leo drove to an industrial park on the outskirts of the city. He didn't meet a contact in some shadowy alley. He met an ordinary-looking man in a pickup truck in the parking lot of a plumbing supply warehouse. It was a clean, simple transaction, an envelope exchanged for a small, heavy box. Arthur managed to get a few grainy photos of the man and his license plate. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the puzzle. My job was to focus on Chloe. She was the one handling the financial side, the one whose greed seemed to be the engine driving this whole nightmare. Listening through the digital frame, we learned she had a meeting scheduled with their estate lawyer. "Just to make sure all of Mom's assets are properly accounted for in the trust," she told Leo. "We want a seamless transition." A seamless transition. The clinical, corporate language she used to describe profiting from my death made my stomach turn. Arthur and I knew we had to find out what they were planning. "A lawyer's office is tricky," he warned. "Too many people, too many ears." So, we devised a new plan. I called Chloe that morning, my voice fluttering with a manufactured old lady confusion. Chloe. Dear, I started, I'm so sorry to bother you. But I was going through some old papers and I found this life insurance policy of Michael's. It's ancient, and I can't make heads or tails of it. I know you and Leo are so good with these things. Would you mind terribly if I left it with your doorman? Maybe you could just glance at it when you have a spare moment? It was the perfect bait. The mention of another potential financial windfall would be irresistible to her. As expected, she agreed instantly, her voice sharpening with interest, but the file I prepared didn't just contain an old, expired policy. Tucked inside the folder, Arthur had placed a tiny audio recorder, no bigger than a paperclip, activated by a simple pressure switch. When the folder was closed, it was off. When opened, it started recording. The hours crawled by. We tracked Chloe's car to the lawyer's office downtown. We waited. Every minute that passed was agony. Was the recorder working? Would she find it? Finally, her tracker showed her leaving the office and heading to a salon. Once she was safely under a hairdryer, Arthur sent me a text, "Go." He had managed to get me a key fob that worked in the building's garage. I found her SUV, my heart racing, and retrieved the folder from the doorman who she had left it with. Back in the safety of the bakery, we huddled over the tiny device and played the audio. The recording was clear. Chloe wasn't just meeting with the lawyer to manage the trust. She was actively taking steps to liquidate my assets before I was even gone. And the bakery property, the lawyer's voice was saying. We have a preemptive offer from a commercial developer. It's contingent, of course, on the property becoming available in the next 30 days. It's a very aggressive offer, Chloe. Considerably above market value. They want to fast-track the demolition. We'll take it. Chloe's voice was decisive. The sooner, the better. And the life insurance? What's the typical payout window for? An accidental death? With a clear fire marshal's report and no contesting family members, it's usually very swift. 4 to 6 weeks. Excellent, Chloe said. That works perfectly with the closing date for the penthouse. I felt the air leave my lungs. She was selling my home, my life's work, before I was even a memory. The place where I had raised my son was going to be a pile of rubble within a month of my death. The recording was damning. It was irrefutable proof of motive, of a conspiracy that was already in motion. We had the means, the faulty valve. The motive, the money for the penthouse. The opportunity, my late nights at the bakery, and the date. We had everything we needed to go to the police. But Arthur stopped me. Look at this, Eleanor, he said, pointing to the corkboard. We have a strong case for conspiracy. They'll go to jail, no doubt. But people like them? They have money. They'll hire the best lawyers. They'll appeal. They'll find loopholes. They might serve a few years, maybe 10 if we're lucky. And then they'll get out. And they'll still be rich from all the money they've already hidden away. He looked at me, his eyes hard as flint. Is that enough for you? A few years in a comfortable prison, knowing they still ultimately win. I thought about it. I thought about them getting out, still young enough to enjoy the millions they felt so entitled to. I thought about the smug look on Chloe's face, the weakness in my son's. And a cold, hard certainty settled in my heart. No, it wasn't enough. I don't just want them in jail, Arthur, I said, my voice low. I want them to lose everything. I want them to feel the same crushing loss that I feel right now. I want them to be publicly humiliated. I want their whole world to burn to the ground, just like they planned to burn mine. A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. I was hoping you'd say that. He explained his plan. It was audacious, theatrical, and incredibly dangerous. It wasn't about just stopping the murder. It was about orchestrating a trap so perfect that they would not only be arrested but also financially and socially ruined, live, in front of the entire world. The plan was this: we would let them proceed. We would let Leo come to the bakery on the night of September 25th. We would let him plant the device. But instead of me being there, the bakery would be rigged with hidden cameras. And instead of a gas explosion, they would walk into a surprise party of their own making, with the police and a news crew as the guests of honor. I have a friend, Arthur said. Jenna Riley. She's a bulldog of a reporter at the local news station. The kind who lives for stories of corruption and greed. She'll bring her cameras. We're not just going to catch them, Eleanor. We're going to make them famous. The final days were a blur of preparation. Arthur, using skills he hadn't employed in a decade, expertly installed several tiny, high-definition cameras throughout the bakery, covering every angle of the main kitchen. We tested the angles, the lighting, the audio. We set up a remote feed to a van he would rent, parked a block away. This was it. There was no turning back. The night before the 25th, I stood alone in the bakery. The familiar smells of cinnamon and vanilla felt different, tinged with the metallic scent of fear. This place had been my refuge, my identity. And tomorrow night, it would become a stage for the final act of my life as I knew it. I ran my hand over the cool stainless steel counter, a counter I had wiped down thousands of times. I looked at the old gas oven, my workhorse, the tool they had chosen as my murder weapon. They thought this was the end of my story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. September 25th dawned gray and overcast, a perfect mirror for the storm brewing inside me. To the world, it was just another Thursday. I opened the bakery at 6 a.m. like always, the smell of fresh coffee and baking bread filling the air. Customers came and went, oblivious, sharing idle chatter about the weather while I served them with a steady hand and a calm smile that felt like a mask I was wearing. Every interaction was freighted with a secret significance. It was the last time I would ever sell a croissant to Mrs. Gable, the last time I'd share a joke with the construction crew that came in for their morning muffins. I was saying goodbye to a life I had loved, a life that was about to be burned away, just not in the way my son had planned. Arthur had everything in place. The surveillance van, a nondescript plumbing vehicle he'd rented, was parked a block away with a clear line of sight to the bakery's back entrance. His old police contact, a detective named Miller, was briefed and had a two-man team on standby, ready to move on Arthur's signal. Jenna Riley, the reporter, was waiting with her cameraman in a separate car, her journalistic instincts buzzing. She understood the arrangement perfectly. She would get the exclusive story of a lifetime. But she would only move when Arthur gave the word. At 7 p.m. I flipped the sign on the door to "Closed" for the final time. I wiped down the counters, cleaned the display case, and took a long, last look around the place that had been my entire world. Then, I walked out the back door, leaving it unlocked as I always did for the first few minutes while taking out the trash, a part of my routine Leo knew well. I didn't look back. I walked calmly down the alley, rounded the corner, and climbed into the passenger seat of the van where Arthur was waiting. Inside, it was a different world. A pair of laptops glowed in the dark, displaying crisp, multi-angle feeds from the cameras hidden inside my kitchen. Seeing my empty, silent bakery on the screens felt surreal, like watching a movie of my own life. "Ready?" Arthur asked, his voice low. I simply nodded, my throat too tight for words. And so, we waited. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The silence in the van was thick with tension, broken only by the crackle of Arthur's police scanner. Every passing set of headlights made my heart leap. Doubt began to creep in. Had he changed his mind? Had they gotten spooked? Then, at 9:52 p.m., a dark sedan without its headlights on crept down the adjacent street and parked in the shadows. A figure emerged, dressed in dark clothing with a baseball cap pulled low. Even in the grainy night vision of the street camera, I knew it was him. It was Leo. "He's here," Arthur said into his burner phone. "Target has arrived. Stand by." We watched on the laptop as Leo slipped into the alley. He moved quickly, furtively, a man entirely out of his element. He tried the back door, found it unlocked as expected, and disappeared inside. A moment later, he appeared on our main screen. Inside my kitchen, the high-definition cameras captured everything. The anxiety on his face, the way his hands trembled as he pulled the small, heavy regulator valve and a set of tools from his backpack. He looked less like a cold-blooded killer and more like a terrified child who had wandered into a forest far too deep. But any flicker of pity I might have felt was instantly extinguished as I watched him kneel before the old oven. My oven. He worked clumsily, his breath fogging in the cool air, his movements jerky and unsure. He was following a plan designed by someone else. The audio picked up his muttered curses as he struggled with a wrench. I watched, my hand gripping the armrest, as he detached the existing gas line and began fitting the faulty valve into place. This was it. The final, irrefutable act of betrayal. My son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, was setting a death trap for me. When he was finished, he stood up, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He gave the valve one last check, a faint look of relief on his face. He had done it. In the van, Arthur raised his phone to his lips. "He's done," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "Move in. Now." What happened next was a symphony of controlled chaos. Suddenly, the bakery was flooded with blinding white light from all sides. The back and front doors burst open simultaneously. "Police! Hands in the air! Get on the ground, now!" Detective Miller's voice boomed through the kitchen. Leo froze, his head snapping up, his face a perfect mask of horror and disbelief. At the same instant, Jenna Riley and her cameraman stormed in through the front door, the camera's light adding to the glare. "We're live at the Rolling Pin Bakery where police have just apprehended a man in a developing situation." Leo stumbled backward, tripping over a flour sack, his eyes wide with panic as the officers surrounded him, and then, I moved. I stepped out of the van and walked toward the light spilling from my bakery. Arthur was by my side. I walked through the throng of police, past the flashing lights and the live camera, and stopped in the doorway of my kitchen. The scene was frozen. The police, the reporter, all seemed to fade into the background. There was only Leo, on his knees, his face pale and slack-jawed as he stared at me. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Mom?" he whispered, the sound barely audible over the crackle of police radios. His eyes darted around the room in confusion. "But, you're not supposed to be here." I looked down at the son I no longer knew, the stranger kneeling amidst the ruins of our life. The grief, the anger, the years of sacrifice, it all coalesced into a single moment of devastating clarity. I felt no tears, only a profound and terrible calm. "You're right, Leo," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. "I'm not. This was supposed to be my story. But you were never the author." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The bakery betrayal, as the media dubbed it, was the lead story for weeks. The live footage of Leo's arrest, his shocked face as he saw me, was played on a loop. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence, he confessed within hours, implicating both Chloe and Marcus. Chloe's arrest was captured by another news crew as she was leaving a five-star restaurant, her look of haughty indignation turning to panicked disbelief. Marcus was picked up at his betting parlor, his luck having finally, irrevocably, run out. The trial was a formality. They were all found guilty. Leo received 20 years, Chloe 25 as the mastermind, and Marcus 15 for his role. They lost everything. Their assets were seized to pay legal fees, their reputations were annihilated, and the life of luxury they were willing to kill for vanished forever. A year later, I stood in front of a new building. The rolling pin was gone. I had sold the property, unable to wash away the memories of that final night. But with the proceeds, I had established the Eleanor Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing grants and mentorship to single parents wanting to start their own small businesses. Arthur stood beside me. No longer just a customer, but my closest friend. "You did a good thing, Eleanor," he said quietly. I looked at the hopeful faces of the first scholarship recipients, a new generation of dreamers building their own futures. I had lost a son, a loss that would forever be a quiet ache in my heart. But in his place, I had found a new purpose. I had learned that a life built on selfless sacrifice can be a beautiful thing, but a life reclaimed for oneself is a masterpiece. I had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged anew. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely, free. Eleanor's story is such a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. It's a chilling reminder of how greed can corrupt, but also an inspiring story of how resilience can lead to rebirth. What part of her journey resonated with you the most? I would love to read your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If you have a story about overcoming a deep betrayal, and you feel comfortable sharing, it could be a source of strength for someone else reading. If this story moved you, please consider giving it a like to support the channel. It truly helps us to continue finding and sharing these incredible narratives. And of course, if you don't want to miss the next dramatic and thoughtful story we have lined up, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Thank you so much for spending your time here with us today. Remember that even after the most chaotic storms, there is always the promise of a peaceful dawn. May you find your strength, honor your own story, and always hold on to hope.